Okay, welcome back from the break. So in the second half of today's lesson, we will go over how to install Visual Studio and write your first program. So the first thing you want to do is type in this URL up here. So type in https visualstudio.microsoft.com. Okay, so visualstudio.microsoft.com. So once you type in this URL, it takes you to here. So the first thing you want to do when you see this web page with Microsoft and Visual Studio is you want to come here and you want to hover over this tab, Download for Windows. So once you hover over Download for Windows, there's an option for you to click Community 2017. So let's just click that, Community 2017. And then it automatically downloads it for you. So it says, thank you for downloading Visual Studio. So it actually already downloaded it for you. The executable will pop up in just a second. Actually, it already popped up here. And yeah, so if you want to look a little bit more about the shortcuts and stuff with Visual Studio, you can click Learn More, and I highly encourage you to do that. We will just skip that for today's lesson, and we will just click the executable. So click this. If you should see a pop up here. Do you want to allow this app? Click yes, and then just wait a little bit, and then it will lead you to the installer. So it will say we need to set up a few things. So continue, download it, installed, and just wait a few minutes. Yeah, so it's actually installing now. So now it's going to take you to this window. Okay. So what you want to do here is you want to do desktop development with C++. So you want to select this option here. And when you come down here, you don't actually need to select any of these. Um, However, if you're doing other types of development, like mobile app development or game development or Python, Node.js, Azure, whatever, then you might want to select those. But just for the purposes of this course, you only have to select desktop development with C++, and that's all you need to do. So then install while downloading, make sure it says install while downloading, and then you can just click install. And that's all. It will say thank you for installing Visual Studio. Then it will install. So I will actually, so we will actually pick up after Visual Studio is finished installing. It will actually take a little while. It's not exactly a very small application. It's 1.6 gigabytes. So it will take a little bit, a few minutes probably, and we will get started after Visual Studio is finished installing. Okay, so we've actually finished installing Visual Studio, but um, Visual Studio actually requires you to reboot your computer. So we actually have one more step to go. So after you reboot your computer, restart your computer, we'll actually get started with the actual programming process. Okay, now we're actually fully good to go. So this is the home page of Microsoft Visual Studio. You should see something like getting started. You shouldn't see anything here. These are just because I did a bunch of projects on Visual Studio in the past, and you can open or you can do a new project. So actually, this is actually a shortcut. You can either use this, or you can either create a new project from here, or I'm actually going to show you how to do it. So this on top here, this is actually your taskbar here. So you can file, you can do new project. Oops. You can do new project, open. You can actually save here, and you can exit here. So these are, you can also check out your research projects, um, Don't worry about Server Explorer and Toolbox. We don't have to use those that much, or actually at all even. Um, the Edit tab, you get to do stuff like cut, copy, paste. This stuff uh, is all shortcutted, right? Because you have this view. This is important. Let's say if you want to see certain attributes of your code, for example, your error, your output, whatever, then you come to view. Project. Debug is also very important. We're actually going to get into what debugging is in a later lesson. Team, this is for like multi-party multi-party projects. Like I was talking about, C++ is actually really useful for that, and the Microsoft Visual Studio actually provides you a way to do that, so to connect with other team members. Cool. So tools, this is also kind of advanced. If you want to connect a database, if you already have, let's say, a database reader, then you can use this to connect to a database, and you can actually print your data to the database. So that's actually pretty cool. That's also for advanced projects, so don't really worry about that too much. Tests, this we will get into in later videos. Debugging, running, all that good stuff. Performance profiler, this is actually what I use to see how fast my code is running. And this is another reason why I can tell you that C++ is faster than Java, and it's especially faster than Python and these other languages. And this is how you tell. You have this really nifty performance profiler that sort of just gives you like the diagnostic sometimes. So window, this is mostly for layouting and help. You probably shouldn't ever need this. Personally, if I need help, I usually go online. And this is sort of your where you can specify shortcuts for, like, say, new projects. You can save, you can undo, redo, and you can run. So this is actually the run button. It has something like attach here. This will actually change once you compile a program. So now then it will say like debug or something like that, but just means that the green play button means to run. Find in files, you probably don't need this. And to the right here, so this is actually pretty important. Solution Explorer, right? So when I actually create a bunch of new tabs, when I actually create a bunch of new projects and a bunch of new C++ files, this is where it will show up. So let's say I created, let's say, 3 or 4 projects, and each project I have like 4 to like 7 or 8 C++ files. So then this will show up in my Solution Explorer, and I can actually access those from this right-hand side, right? So once this appears, because this area is actually where you do all your programming, and this area is where you sort of access the this area is where you actually access the individual files, right? Okay, so let's now do File, New, and when you hover over New, don't click New. You want to come to Project, because we actually need to create a new solution. So we do Project first, and now we can simply call we can simply stay here, Visual C++. You don't actually want to go into any of these other ones, right? Because these are not what we want. All we want is the C++, the Windows C++ console application. So let's just click this. Actually, I did not mean to do that. What I was supposed to do is I actually should have clicked it once, and then use and then rename the file, right? Because I don't want to actually call it console application 1. I want to actually call it another name. So actually, I'm actually going to teach you how to rename your project. If we just wait 1 second, so C++ is actually creating the project, and see, look here. So now C++ created the project. It actually also auto-generated a C++ file. This doesn't normally happen. I'm actually going to show you how to make a new one. And C++ actually, or Visual Studio actually created a console application. So now you can see your Solution Explorer actually has a ton of stuff. It has a console application. It has this folder called References, which is empty right now. External dependencies. This is what you get when you install C++ in Visual Studio for the first time, right? So this actually gives you all of the library, all of the basic libraries you use. For example, you come to here, you actually see C string is a library, float is a library. Those are all types, which I'll get into in a later lesson. You have math here, which is also a library. You have standard IO, right? So standard IO and standard library, these are actually what we need for every single C++ file, and I'm actually going to insert that in here. So this is actually part of the reason why installing Microsoft Visual Studio took so long, because actually what it's doing is it actually installs all these really nice libraries for you to access. So these are the built-in libraries. Again, if you want new libraries, you're going to have to sort of copy paste them in yourself, but this is where you do it. So external dependencies is where your libraries are. Okay, so your header files. So every C++ file needs a header file in order to properly run. So this header file is actually empty because it doesn't specify anything, but you need a header file nonetheless, because the header file actually allows your computer to set up the compile and actually run and output your code. So actually, let's come in here. So C++ application.cpp, we're actually going to rename. So once you do here, you actually right-click on the bolded name, right? So you right-click here, and you want to come here. You want to do rename. And I want to rename this to C++ section 1. Okay, C++ section 1. And now I also want to rename this C++ file. I want to call it hello world. So hello world, actually when you do this, it actually changes the name automatically. So now you're actually at hello world.cpp, and now it includes your pch.h, because this is actually the header file for your entire solution. So you need this for every single header file. This is actually what links all of the C++ files in your solution together and allows them to access a common set of variables, or um, a common library, or a common import. And these all go in your header files, or no, these all go in your external dependencies, and your header file actually specifies any special things you want to import. So actually, if you look at this program, you can see that there are these lines that are entirely green, and there are lines that have some other color. So the lines that are entirely green, you may actually notice that they have these two slash marks ahead of them. So what these are, they're called comments. So when you program, or when a programmer creates a section of code, they actually want to specify sort of instructions for people who subsequently use their code. And if you have, let's say, 1,000 lines of code, you obviously need to tell someone who's trying to look at your code sort of like where things are, what to do. So that's where comments come in. So comments are like comments that your teacher gives you on your graded English report, right? So there are things that are on your actual code, your actual product, that sort of give instructions or sort of give extra information, or generally comments on your file. So when you type a comment in, actually, this doesn't actually change anything. For example, you can say, I can actually type in welcome to C++. This will be an amazing course. So this actually doesn't change anything when I actually run the code. So a comment, just make sure that a comment is essentially just for sort of informational or description purposes. It doesn't actually serve a purpose in coding language. It's only there for people to actually read, for people to read information besides the actual code itself. So we're actually going to go ahead and actually create our own, our first C++ project. So here they actually have one already for us. we're actually going to change this a little bit here. So actually, we will do this. So we want to include pch.h. So include, what include does, well, sharp or hashtag include. Um, so what this does is it actually adds something from your external dependencies list into your file. For example, if I wanted to use this library, let's say I want to use the math library, which we will. If I wanted to use the math library, then I would have to do something like this. I would have to do / include math.h, right? So if we have something like this, then I can actually use functions that are defined in math.h. And also we need to include IOStream. This is just generally very important. So IOStream is where it's where you can actually compile and actually output your code. So that's really important. So IOStream sort of instructs your computer to include like a section of C++ code that allows you to perform like input and output, right? So you can actually, if you don't have this IOStream here, then we can actually do our first operation in C++, which is to print hello world. So this is nice. Um, so this is actually all you have to do in C++. If you guys are familiar with C, you know that you actually have to do something like this. You have to do C out, um, hello world, and you have to do something like end L, and do something like this, right? But here, you don't actually need to do any of that. Here, all you have to do is you have to type std, which actually means your standard input, right? And uh, colon. Actually, before we actually talk about what's inside, let's talk about this. So you might wonder why there's a blue int instead of gray or red here, which I sort of explained what they were. So what the blue int means is that it's actually a declaration of a function. So I'm actually going to get into functions in a later lesson, but how you declare a function is by specifying its return type. So this can be like int, or let's just say for now it's int. We will actually get into types and also a later lesson. So you can sort of you use what you use the concepts in today's lesson when you're programming later on and think about it. So main is actually the name of our function, and we need these regular parentheses, a pair of parentheses, in order to specify any parameters you want to pass in. Now, with main, this is actually a built-in function, so we don't actually need to pass any parameters inside. So if you don't understand what I'm saying, don't worry. It's not really a super big deal. We will always get to this in later lessons. So this is the function. So the last thing in a function is the curly brackets. So in the curly brackets, this is what the computer actually sees. So it doesn't actually just see a line specifying a function and stuff inside. It actually sees like a function as like a header, and then you have a bunch of code that the computer will run, and it will run associated with the actual header, the name of the header, right? So if I wanted to do something else here, I can just sort of say a line of code outside of the curly brackets in the header when it's actually clearly not. So the open curly bracket and the closed curly brackets just indicate like the beginning of the function's definition. And keep in mind, this is actually a property that all functions have. All right, so now for I guess the most important line of this program, it's std : C out. I don't know. This is like a less than sign, hello world, parentheses, and you have this end here. Actually, we don't need this right now. Um, this is okay. So this line is actually called a statement in C++. So a statement is different from a function because, well, first of all, it doesn't have the curly brackets, and second of all, sort of a statement is like the lowest level you can get in Python. Not in Python, the lowest level you can get in C++, because functions actually include a bunch of statements. So this is a C++ statement. Um, So most lines in your program will actually consist of simple statements. And the thing about statements is that they are actually executed in order. So pretty much if I have another command here, so sort of command or statement, another statement, actually the computer will actually read this line first, then read this line, and then will read this line. So the computer actually reads in chronological order. So now actually let's dissect this statement, right? So what the statement does is that it takes an SCD, which means character, standard character output, and it takes this operator, which sort of um, pushes hello world to cout. So pretty much what this does is it takes some element to its right and sort of inputs it to its left, right? So it's inserted inside into this std colon colon c out. And lastly, you actually need to have the semicolon here. If you're familiar with Java, you know in Java you need semicolons. In Python you don't need to, but in C++ you actually also need to. And I think perhaps the very, very last thing I haven't mentioned in this program is the use of the quotation marks, right? So quotation marks can be used to denote files here, like you have IOStream, you have IOStream here, and you also have PCH. And and uh, quotation marks can also be used for defining things such as strings. So what a string is essentially a message that you want to tell the computer. You want the computer to print out or manipulate it or do something cool with it. But in general, strings are one of the many data types you'll learn, and strings are used um, with quotation marks. Okay, so actually, now let's actually run this. So, so after we've created this program here, it's very short. We can actually just make this like 5 or 6 lines. That's how short it is. I think it's 6 lines. So how we run this is now it says the green triangle actually says local Windows debugger, right? So before we do that, we actually want to come into this thing called build, and we can actually come here and we can actually do build solution, right? So click build solution here. And what it does, it will create an output on the bottom, and it will say build started. And after the build is done, provided that you have no errors in your code, your Microsoft Visual Studio will print 1 succeeded. So whereas in Python or in Java, you actually just get the answer outright, in C++ you actually do have to do another step, right? So um, after you've built your project, so all this is actually compiled now. So what I mean by compiled is it's actually in some sort of binary format that the computers can actually read. So the last thing you do before saying that you actually created your first program in C++ is you want to hit this debugger button. So once you just click it once and just wait a few seconds, it will take you to your command prompt. And when you take to your command prompt, it actually just prints out what you wanted to print out. Well, let's see out wanted to print out. Hello world,